As the casket was being lowered, my greedy daughter-in-law said, "I'll sell the farm to pay for my college." That's what he wanted. I handed the pastor the letter with all of my son's true wishes. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The cemetery air felt heavy with grief as they lowered my son's casket into the cold, unforgiving earth. Robert was only 38. My beautiful boy, taken from us in a car accident that shattered my world into 1,000 jagged pieces. Standing there, my legs weak beneath me, I wondered how I would ever find the strength to leave this place without him. The minister's words blurred together as I stared at the polished mahogany box that held my child. The son I had carried beneath my heart nursed at my breast and watched grow into the kindest man I'd ever known. My Robert, who loved the sprawling farmland that had been in our family for 3 generations, who spent every sunrise walking the fields with the same reverence his father once had. I barely registered the sympathetic touches on my shoulder, the murmured condolences from faces I could hardly focus on. My world had narrowed to this hole in the ground and the crushing weight of my grief. That's when I heard it. A whisper not meant for comfort, but cold and calculated, slicing through my sorrow like a blade. "I'll sell the farm to pay for my law degree," Deborah, my daughter-in-law, murmured to her sister standing beside her. "It's what Robert wanted." My head snapped up, momentarily shocked out of my grief. The farm? Sell our land? The very land that Robert had worked every day of his adult life? The fields he'd recently converted to organic practices? The home he'd lovingly restored with his own hands? I looked at Deborah, her perfectly styled hair, her tasteful black dress, her face showing just the right amount of grief for a newly widowed woman. Not a single tear had smudged her carefully applied makeup. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something there that chilled me to the bone. Satisfaction. The realization crashed through me. She was waiting for this. Perhaps not Robert's death. I couldn't bear to think she'd wish that upon him. But she'd been waiting to be free of the farm life she'd always quietly disdained. The life my son had loved with every fiber of his being. "It's what he would have wanted," she added, louder now. "For my benefit, a lie. A terrible, calculated lie." With trembling fingers, I reached into my purse and withdrew the sealed envelope I'd been carrying close to my heart. Robert had given it to me just 3 months ago, after a routine checkup had revealed some concerns about his heart. "Just in case, Mom," he'd said with that reassuring smile of his. "Keep this safe for me." I'd forgotten about it until the police appeared at my door with news that would forever divide my life into before and after. While sorting through Robert's personal effects last night, I'd found his letter to me, reminding me about the envelope. The minister was concluding the service, asking if anyone wanted to share final words. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, carrying me forward to stand beside my son's casket. My son. My voice cracked, but I forced myself to continue, drawing strength from the memory of Robert's warm eyes. My son was thoughtful and deliberate in everything he did. I turned to face the small gathering, neighbors, friends, the community that had watched Robert grow from a rambunctious boy to a respected man. Robert prepared for every possibility, I continued, my voice growing stronger, including one he hoped would never come. I extended the envelope toward the minister. "These are my son's final wishes, written in his own hand, legally notarized and entrusted to me." Deborah stepped forward, her composed expression faltering for the first time. "Sandra, this isn't the time or place." "This is exactly the time," I said quietly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Robert wanted his wishes known, should anything happen to him. I handed the envelope to Pastor Miller, who had baptized Robert as a baby and had been a spiritual guide to our family for decades. "Please," I whispered. As he took the envelope, I felt something shift inside me. Grief making room for resolve. Robert may have been taken from me, but his legacy, his final wishes, would not be stolen too. The minister's hands broke the seal, and Deborah's perfectly manicured nails dug into her sister's arm. The paper rustled, sounding unnaturally loud in the cemetery's silence. In that moment, watching my daughter-in-law's face, I knew the battle for my son's legacy had only just begun. I couldn't sleep that night after the funeral. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's casket lowering into the ground. So instead, I sat on the porch of my little cottage at the edge of the farm property, wrapped in one of Robert's old flannel shirts, and watched the moonlight spill over the fields he had loved so much. The farm hadn't always been successful. When James and I purchased the land 40 years ago, it was little more than parched soil and dilapidated buildings. The bank manager warned us we were throwing our savings away. But James had vision. "This land has good bones, Sandra," he'd said, his eyes crinkling with that smile that had made me fall in love with him at 19. "It just needs someone to believe in it again." We worked ourselves to exhaustion those first years. James took extra shifts at the lumber mill while I managed our small herd of dairy cows. We rose before dawn and collapsed into bed well after sunset. Our hands grew calloused, our skin weathered by sun and wind. But with each harvest, each successful season, the farm began to flourish. When Robert was born, we transformed an old storage room into a nursery, painting the walls the color of summer corn. As a toddler, he followed James around the farm, his tiny boots leaving imprints beside his father's larger ones. By age 10, he was helping with the milking. By 16, he could drive the tractor better than most grown men. "This place is in his blood," James once said proudly, watching our son repair a fence with careful precision. The memory of my husband's face brought fresh pain. 5 years gone now, taken by the same heart condition that had recently concerned Robert's doctor. James never got to see the organic methods Robert implemented, the way he transformed our conventional farm into a model of sustainable agriculture. He would have been so proud. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Headlights cut through the darkness as a car pulled up to my cottage. Deborah stepped out, still wearing her funeral clothes, her face set, in a mask of determination. "We need to talk, Sandra," she announced, climbing the porch steps without waiting for an invitation. I tightened Robert's shirt around me. "It's nearly midnight, Deborah. That little stunt you pulled at the funeral." She stopped, taking a deep breath as if to compose herself. "That letter. What exactly did Robert write?" "Pastor Miller will read it tomorrow at the meeting with the lawyer, as Robert requested," I said quietly. "You'll hear it then, along with everyone else." Her perfectly manicured hands gripped her purse. "I was his wife. I have a right to know now." "Yes, you were his wife," I acknowledged, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "For 7 years. Yet somehow you never bothered to learn what this land meant to him." Something flashed in her eyes. Anger, perhaps guilt. "Don't pretend you know anything about our marriage, Sandra." But I did know. I knew how Robert's face would fall when Deborah canceled another community potluck to attend a networking event in the city. I knew how he'd make excuses for her absence at harvest festivals, neighborhood functions, church gatherings. I knew about the arguments they'd had over the farm's future. "He wanted to sell," she insisted. "He was just waiting for the right time to tell you." I shook my head. Robert never wanted to sell this land. This wasn't just a business to him, Deborah. It was his heritage, his passion. His obsession, she corrected sharply. "Do you know how it feels to compete with dirt and crops for your husband's attention? To live in this backwater when I could have had a career in the city?" Her voice cracked slightly, revealing the resentment she'd harbored throughout their marriage. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Deborah had grown up in Chicago, the daughter of a corporate lawyer and a museum curator. The rhythms of farm life, the connection to land and seasons, had always been foreign to her. But then I remembered her cold words at the cemetery, her plans to erase Robert's life's work. "You married a farmer, Deborah," I said simply. "A man who loved this land enough to dedicate his life to it." "And look where that got him," she snapped. "Dead at 38, just like his father, wasting his talents on this." She gestured dismissively at the surrounding fields, when he could have been something. The casual cruelty of her words stole my breath. Before I could respond, she gathered herself, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But you need to be realistic. I'm his widow. The farm legally belongs to me now. Whatever nostalgic notions Robert might have written, in that letter won't change that." She turned to leave, then paused at the steps. "I've already had an offer from Westland Development. They'll pay above market value. The land will be put to better use as a residential community than sitting here growing organic kale." She said the word organic as if it tasted bitter on her tongue. As her car disappeared down the long driveway, I remained on the porch, Robert's shirt pulled tight around me, the weight of her words settling like stones in my stomach. Morning would bring the reading of Robert's letter, his true wishes for the land that had been our family's heart for generations. But Deborah's confidence worried me. Whatever Robert had written, I knew one thing with certainty: the battle for my son's legacy would not be easily won. In the distance, an owl called out, its lonely cry echoing across fields that had witnessed our family's joys and sorrows, triumphs and sacrifices. Fields that now faced an uncertain future. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that Robert would have appreciated. I dressed carefully in a simple navy dress, nothing ostentatious, just dignified enough for the occasion. My hands trembled as I fastened my pearl earrings, a gift from James on our 30th anniversary. The law office of Wilson and Associates occupied the second floor of the town's oldest brick building. As I climbed the worn wooden stairs, I could hear voices already murmuring behind the frosted glass door. I paused, taking a deep breath, before pushing it open. The conference room was more crowded than I'd expected. Pastor Miller sat near the head of the table, Robert's sealed letter placed reverently before him. Mr. Wilson, our family attorney for over 20 years, shuffled papers with practiced efficiency. Deborah was already seated, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, whispering intently with a man I didn't recognize. Her lawyer, I presumed, imported from Chicago. What surprised me were the others. Bill Johnson, our neighboring farmer who'd mentored Robert when he first took over the farm operations. Dr. Reynolds, the local veterinarian who'd cared for our livestock for decades. Sarah from the Farmers Market Committee, and several other members of our tight-knit rural community. Deborah's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "What are all these people doing here?" she demanded of Mr. Wilson. The elderly attorney adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Harmon, they're here at Robert's specific request. As stated in his instructions, the reading of his final wishes is to be witnessed by the community he served." I took the empty seat beside Pastor Miller, who patted my hand gently. Deborah's lawyer leaned forward, his expensive suit out of place among the humble attire of our farming community. "My client objects to this irregular proceeding," he stated, his voice carrying the clipped precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The deceased's estate should be settled privately between his widow and immediate family. Mr. Wilson smiled politely. "While I understand your concern, Mr. Bennett, these proceedings follow the explicit instructions of Robert Harmon, signed and notarized 3 months ago." He gestured to Pastor Miller. "If you would, Pastor." The room fell silent as Pastor Miller broke the seal on the envelope and carefully unfolded the pages inside. His eyes scanned the contents, and a small, sad smile touched his lips before he began to read. I, Robert James Harmon, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my final wishes regarding the disposition of my property and assets, most specifically the family farm known as Harmon Acres. To my beloved wife, Deborah, I leave my personal savings and investments, totaling approximately $175,000, as well as our joint accounts and our home in town. The farm itself, including all 320 acres, the equipment, livestock, and structures thereon, I place in a trust to be administered by my mother, Sandra Harmon, with the express purpose of creating the Harmon Wildlife Sanctuary and Sustainable Agriculture Center. It has long been my dream to transform our family farm into a place where injured and orphaned wildlife can find refuge, where sustainable farming practices can be demonstrated and taught, and where our community can connect with the land that has sustained us for generations. My wife, Deborah, shall be entitled to 25% of any profits generated by the sanctuary and educational programs, provided she honors the terms of this trust and does not contest my wishes to preserve the land for this purpose. I heard Deborah's sharp intake of breath, saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the edge of the table. Pastor Miller continued reading, detailing Robert's vision for the sanctuary, the rehabilitation facilities for injured wildlife, the educational programs for schools, the demonstration gardens showcasing organic methods. If my wife chooses to contest this arrangement, Pastor Miller read, his voice solemn, her interest in the farm shall be forfeited entirely, and the full administration shall pass to my mother with no financial obligation to Deborah. Deborah shot to her feet. This is preposterous! He never discussed any of this with me. Never! She turned to me, her face contorted with fury. You did this! You manipulated him into this ridiculous scheme! Mr. Wilson raised a placating hand. Mrs. Harmon, I can assure you that your husband was quite clear about his intentions. I personally witnessed the signing of this document, and Dr. Harrison certified his mental competence. Mental competence? Deborah laughed, a brittle sound. That held no humor. He wanted to turn valuable agricultural land into a petting zoo. That doesn't sound competent to me. Bill Johnson cleared his throat, his weathered farmer's face grave. Robert talked about this sanctuary for years, Deborah. It wasn't some last-minute idea. He'd been researching wildlife rehabilitation, taking courses online. He showed me the plans just last month. Other voices joined in, community members confirming conversations they'd had with Robert about his dream, the sketches he'd shared, the excitement in his voice when he discussed the future of the land. Deborah's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently in her ear. She shook her head, her eyes burning with determination. I'm contesting this, she announced, gathering her designer purse. My husband was not in his right mind, and this, she gestured dismissively at the letter in Pastor Miller's hands, will not stand up in court. She strode toward the door, her lawyer hurrying after her, but paused to deliver a final shot. Enjoy your fantasy, Sandra. It won't last long. After she left, a heavy silence settled over the room. Then Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. We're with you, Sandra. We'll help make Robert's dream come true. One by one, the others nodded, murmuring their support. In that moment, surrounded by people who had truly known and valued my son, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. So soon after his death, hope. The battle had begun, but I wasn't fighting alone. Word spread quickly in our small town. By afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from neighbors offering support. By evening, my kitchen table was crowded with casserole dishes and freshly baked pies, our community's language of love and solidarity. She doesn't have a case, Bill Johnson assured me over coffee the next morning. His wife, Eleanor, nodded in agreement as she refilled our cups. That letter was properly executed. Robert knew exactly what he was doing. I wanted to believe them, but Deborah's confidence haunted me. She's hired an expensive lawyer from Chicago. We can't match those resources. Eleanor reached across the table to pat my hand. Money isn't everything, Sandra. We have something more valuable: truth. That truth became our rallying cry over the following weeks. While Deborah filed motions and petitions, spinning a narrative of a manipulative mother-in-law and a husband whose judgment had been compromised by medication, our community mobilized in ways I never expected. Sarah organized a fundraiser at the farmers market, selling Harmon Wildlife Sanctuary t-shirts designed by the high school art class. Dr. Reynolds contacted wildlife rehabilitation experts who offered to provide statements about the viability and value of Robert's vision. The local newspaper ran a feature on Robert's environmental work, complete with interviews from farmers who had adopted his sustainable methods. "Your son changed how I think about farming," confessed Mike Peterson, whose family had used chemical pesticides for generations. "We sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. When that hailstorm wiped out half my crop 3 years ago, Robert showed up the next day with seed and stayed till dark helping me replant. Never asked for anything in return except that I considered trying his organic methods on one field." He gestured to the thriving crops before us. "That field outperformed all my others that year. Robert didn't preach or judge, he just showed a better way. That sanctuary would be his legacy, teaching others like he taught me." These stories strengthened my resolve, but Deborah was relentless. She began spreading rumors that I had always disliked her, that I was using Robert's death to control the property and exclude her from decisions. When those tactics failed to turn public opinion, she escalated her legal maneuvers. "She's requesting Robert's medical records from the 6 months before his death," Mr. Wilson informed me during a phone call that left me shaking. Trying to establish that pain medication might have affected his judgment when he wrote the letter. "But he wasn't on strong medication then," I protested. "The heart concerns had just been identified. He was only taking a mild prescription." "I know that, and you know that," Mr. Wilson said gently. "But her strategy is to create enough doubt to persuade a judge to invalidate the letter." The legal battle drained our resources. Attorney fees mounted, and the farm operations suffered. Without Robert's skilled management, I found myself lying awake at night, wondering if I could truly fulfill my son's vision or if Deborah would eventually wear us down. The turning point came unexpectedly. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon 3 months after Robert's death, I was sorting through boxes in his office at the farmhouse, a task I'd been avoiding, when Dr. Harrison knocked on the door. "I've been meaning to stop by," he said, shaking raindrops from his coat. But with Deborah's lawsuit, I thought it best to maintain professional distance until now. Dr. Harrison had been our family physician for decades, delivering Robert and caring for both James and him through their heart issues. "I'm officially retiring next week," he continued, settling into Robert's desk chair. "And before I go, there's something you should know." He explained that Robert had come to see him just 2 weeks before the accident, concerned about occasional heart palpitations. We discussed his family history, scheduled some tests. He was worried, Sandra, but not for himself. The doctor leaned forward. He was worried about Deborah's reaction if his condition worsened. He told me she'd been pressuring him to sell the farm, move to Chicago where she had job prospects. He said, and I quote, "If anything happens to me, Doc, my mother is the only one who will honor what this land is meant to be." I closed my eyes, hearing Robert's voice in those words. "I've written a sworn statement," Dr. Harrison said, placing an envelope on the desk, "about Robert's mental clarity, his consistent vision for the farm over many years, and this specific conversation. My retirement means Deborah can't threaten my practice or reputation." That statement became a cornerstone of our legal defense. When paired with testimonials from community members about Robert's long-standing plans for the sanctuary, it created a compelling picture of a man who had made a deliberate, sound decision about his legacy. Other supporters emerged from unexpected places. The environmental science teacher from the high school organized her students to create a detailed proposal for educational programs at the future sanctuary. 3 neighboring farmers offered to help maintain the agricultural operations during the transition. Even the town council passed a resolution supporting the creation of the wildlife sanctuary as a community asset. The groundswell of support culminated in a town hall meeting where over 200 people gathered to publicly endorse Robert's vision. Local television covered the event, broadcasting images of community members sharing stories of Robert's generosity and environmental stewardship. Deborah arrived halfway through the meeting, standing silently at the back of the hall. Her face remained impassive as speaker after speaker rose to describe what Robert and the farm meant to our community. Only when Bill Johnson directly addressed her, "Deborah, this is what your husband wanted to create, something meaningful that would outlive him." Did I see her composure crack slightly? She left without speaking to anyone, but something in her rigid posture told me she finally understood what she was up against. This wasn't just a grieving mother clinging to sentimentality. This was an entire community united to protect one of their own's final wishes. That night, I stood at the edge of the farm's north pasture, where Robert had planned to build the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Fireflies blinked in the growing darkness, nature's own constellation of hope. "We're getting there, son," I whispered to the evening air. "We're fighting for your dream." The legal proceedings dragged on through summer and into early fall. Depositions, motions, counter-motions, the legal machinery ground slowly, each delay benefiting Deborah, who continued living in the house in town while I struggled to maintain the farm operations. "She's trying to wear you down financially," Mr. Wilson warned during one of our meetings. "It's a common tactic. Keep extending the fight until the opposing party can no longer afford to continue." His words stung because they held truth. My retirement savings were dwindling, and without Robert's expertise, the farm's productivity had suffered. Some days, the weight of it all, grief, financial pressure, uncertainty, felt unbearable. On one such day, I was sorting through Robert's desk again, searching for some farm insurance documents, when I found an unmarked USB drive tucked into a hidden compartment of his drawer. Curious, I plugged it into his computer. The screen filled with a folder labeled D Messages. With trembling fingers, I clicked it open to find dozens of screenshots of text messages, all dated within the last year of Robert's life. As I scrolled through them, my hand flew to my mouth in shock. They were exchanges between Deborah and someone saved in her phone as M. The messages revealed an affair that had been going on for at least 8 months before Robert's death. But more damning were the discussions about the farm. "How much longer do we have to wait?" M had written. "Not long," Deborah replied. "He's finally considering selling. Says the heart thing scared him. Once we have the money, we can start over somewhere new." Another exchange made me physically ill. "What if he won't sell?" M asked. "He will," Deborah responded. "I'm working on him. All those years of loyalty to his mother's precious farm are weakening. Besides, the heart condition makes this the perfect time to push. He feels guilty about potentially leaving me with a farm I can't manage." I sat back, stunned. These messages directly contradicted Deborah's claim that Robert wanted to sell the farm. They revealed her manipulating my son during a vulnerable time, using his health concerns to pressure him into a decision he had resisted for years. With shaking hands, I called Mr. Wilson. Within hours, he arrived with his assistant, carefully, documenting and copying the contents of the USB drive. "This changes everything," he said, his usual calm demeanor animated with urgency. "These messages established that Robert was resistant to selling, that Deborah was the one pushing for it, and that she had ulterior motives. They completely undermine her current legal arguments." "Will it be enough?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Combined with Dr. Harrison's statement and the community testimonials? I believe so." He paused, his expression turning grave. "But Sandra, you should prepare yourself. Once these messages are submitted as evidence, things will get ugly." He wasn't wrong. The next day, after our legal team filed an emergency motion including the new evidence, Deborah appeared at my cottage, her face contorted with rage. "You had no right," she screamed, pushing past me into the living room. "Those were private messages. You invaded my privacy." I remained calm, though my heart hammered in my chest. They were on Robert's computer, in his private drawer. The question is, how did he get them? "Did he know about your affair, Deborah?" She faltered, color draining from her face. "Did my son discover your betrayal?" I pressed. "Is that why he wrote that letter? To make sure you couldn't sell his beloved farm to run off with your lover?" "You don't understand," she said, her voice suddenly small. "This life, this endless cycle of planting and harvesting, the isolation, the simplicity, it was suffocating me. Robert knew I was unhappy. Yet you married him anyway," I said quietly, knowing he was a farmer, that this land was his passion. "I thought I could change him." The words burst from her like a confession. "I thought eventually he'd see that we could have a better life elsewhere. But he was just like his father, stubborn, rooted to this dirt like it was part of him." In that moment, I saw Deborah clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as a villain, but as a deeply unhappy woman who had made the grave mistake of trying to change the man she married rather than accepting him as he was. "Who is M?" I asked softly. She sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "Marcus, my old college boyfriend. He's a real estate developer now." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Ironic, isn't it? He's the one who put me in touch with Westland. Development." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about Deborah wanting to escape farm life. There was financial gain involved for both her and this Marcus if the farm sold to developers. "Did Robert know?" I asked again. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "He found the messages a week before the accident. He confronted me, but I denied everything, told him they were taken out of context." Her voice caught. We argued. He left to clear his head. That's when. Her words trailed off. The accident. My son's last moments had been clouded by the pain of his wife's betrayal. The knowledge cut through me like a blade. "Get out," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "The messages won't hold up in court. They were obtained without my consent." "They were obtained by my son," I interrupted, who had every right to know his wife was planning to sell his family heritage out from under him. "Now please leave before I forget the manners my mother taught me." After she left, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, processing the full weight of what I'd learned. Robert had known about the affair, about Deborah's plans. Perhaps that knowledge had influenced his decision to legally protect the farm, to ensure his mother would be its steward rather than his unfaithful wife. The next morning, Mr. Wilson called, with news I hardly dared to believe. Deborah's lawyer had contacted him requesting settlement terms. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that Robert's final wishes might prevail after all. The settlement came faster than anyone expected. Once Deborah realized her position was untenable, she accepted the terms. Outlined in Robert's letter, the house in town, his personal savings, and a modest percentage of any future sanctuary profits. In exchange, she dropped all claims to the farmland and signed the necessary documents to establish the Wildlife Sanctuary Trust. 2 weeks later, a moving truck appeared at the house in town. I watched from a distance as Deborah's belongings were loaded, feeling neither triumph nor animosity, just a profound relief that Robert's vision would finally be honored. As the truck pulled away, Deborah emerged from the house, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. For a moment, she stood on the porch, gazing in the direction of the farm, then turned away without a backward glance. I heard later that she moved to California with Marcus. The real estate developer had apparently lost interest once the farm, was legally protected from development. Their relationship dissolved within months, leaving Deborah to rebuild her life alone in a state far from the memories, both good and painful, that Indiana held for her. With the legal battles behind us, the real work began. The community that had rallied to our defense now threw themselves into creating Robert's sanctuary with the same passionate determination. Bill Johnson brought his tractor to help clear areas for the wildlife enclosures. Sarah organized volunteer planting days for the native gardens. Dr. Reynolds connected us with wildlife rehabilitation specialists who provided invaluable guidance on facility design. We broke ground on the main rehabilitation center that spring, 1 year after Robert's death. As the concrete foundation was poured, I placed a small metal box in one corner, a time capsule containing Robert's letter, photos of him working the land, and handwritten notes from community members sharing memories of his kindness and vision. For future generations, I explained to the small gathering. So they'll know why this place exists and the man who dreamed it into being. The transformation took nearly 10 months. Fields that had once grown corn and soybeans now featured carefully designed habitats for different wildlife species. The old barn became an education center, its walls adorned with displays about sustainable agriculture and local ecosystems. A network of gentle walking trails wound through the property, offering visitors glimpses of rehabilitating animals while protecting more sensitive areas from disturbance. Through it all, I felt Robert's presence, in the morning mist rising over the fields, in the calls of returning birds, in the faces of volunteers who had known and loved him. I wasn't rebuilding this farm for myself. I was creating the legacy my son had envisioned, a sacred trust passed from one generation to the next. On a perfect May morning, exactly 2 years after Robert's death, we held the official opening of the Harmon Wildlife Sanctuary and Sustainable Agriculture Center. Over 300 people attended, from neighboring farmers to school children to county officials. Local news covered the event, interviewing volunteers and capturing footage of the first official residents: a rehabilitating red-tailed hawk, 2 orphaned fawns, and a family of opossums rescued from a demolished building. "This is exactly what Robert wanted," Bill Johnson said, his weathered face solemn as we stood together watching children press their noses against the viewing window of the fawn enclosure. A place where people could connect with the land, understand why it matters. "I think he'd be proud," I whispered, my throat tight with emotion. "He would be," Bill confirmed, but not surprised. "He always said you were the strongest person he knew, that you'd move mountains if you believed it was right." In the months that followed, the sanctuary flourished beyond our expectations. Schools booked field trips months in advance. Neighboring farmers began adopting sustainable practices demonstrated in our educational programs. Wildlife rehabilitators from across the state referred cases to us, recognizing the quality of our facilities and care. The most unexpected development came from universities. Professors began bringing students for research projects, documenting the environmental impacts of our regenerative agriculture methods, studying wildlife rehabilitation techniques, even examining the socioeconomic benefits the sanctuary brought to our rural community. One autumn afternoon, nearly 3 years after Robert's passing, I sat on the porch of my cottage, watching golden light spill across the sanctuary grounds. A class of elementary school children followed their guide along the educational trail, their excited voices carrying on the breeze. Near the pond, 2 volunteers released a rehabilitated great blue heron, watching in reverent silence as it took flight, strong wings carrying it into the freedom of the open sky. The farm that had sustained my family for generations now nurtured wildlife, educated children, and brought together a community. It wasn't what James and I had envisioned when we first purchased this land as newlyweds, but it felt right. A natural evolution of our family's connection to this place. From my pocket, I withdrew the small, worn envelope I always carried, the original note Robert had written to accompany his legal letter. meant for my eyes only. Though I knew the words by heart, I unfolded it carefully. Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but the land remains. You taught me that we don't really own this earth. We're just its caretakers for a little while. Now it's your turn to care, for our piece of it in a new way. I know it won't be easy, but remember what Dad always said. Anything worth doing never is. I love you, and I trust you with my dream. Robert. I refolded the note, smiling through my tears. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk, perhaps our first rehabilitated resident, soared over the sanctuary, riding the thermals in lazy circles. The sight filled me with a quiet joy, a sense of rightness that transcended grief. We did it, son, I whispered to the open air. Your dream is alive. The sanctuary would continue to grow and evolve long after I was gone, a living testimony to a man who had loved this land enough to ensure its protection. In the end, that was the greatest gift Robert had given me. Not just a purpose for my remaining years, but the knowledge that his values and vision would endure, touching countless lives for generations to come. Some might call it justice, that Deborah's plans were thwarted, that the land she had hoped to sell for profit now served a greater purpose. But sitting there as twilight softened the sanctuary's edges, I preferred to think of it differently. This wasn't an ending. It was a continuation, a new chapter in our family's story. And somewhere, I believed Robert was watching, at peace with the legacy he had left behind.